If you're in sales, you know that closing a major deal is a completely different ballgame than your average everyday sale. So today, we're going to dive into the fascinating research behind spin selling, a method that totally rewrote the rules for how to tackle those big, complex deals.
It all really starts with this one question that has probably driven countless sales pros crazy. You know, you do everything by the book. You follow the playbook, but for some reason, the big one gets away. Why is that? What is it about major sales that just seems to break all the traditional rules?
For decades, this was the gospel. Sales training hammered this home. The idea that every single conversation, every interaction should be pushing toward the close. It's a mantra that's been drilled into generations of sellers, but what if it's just wrong?
That's right, the very foundation of classic sales technique, that aggressive, persistent close. It's not just ineffective in big deals, it can actually be destructive. And this is where we're going to start, by challenging one of the most sacred cows in the entire industry.
So let's unpack the research that completely debunks this famous sales tactic. We're going to see exactly why the stuff that works for small, simple sales can be a total disaster when the deals get bigger.
And look, the evidence for this comes from one of the largest studies ever done on sales performance. A researcher named Neil Rackham and his team analyzed a staggering 35,000 sales calls. This wasn't about opinions or theories. This was about hard data on what the top performers actually do. And what they found was, honestly, shocking. The more closing attempts a salesperson made, the fewer sales they got. Pushing for the close just made sophisticated buyers put their walls up. And maybe the biggest takeaway was this. Success wasn't about how good you were at closing. It was all about what happened much earlier in the call, the investigating stage.
And that leads us right to the absolute core of the spin method. If closing isn't the key, then what is? Well, the secret, it turns out, isn't about pushing your solution. It's about deeply understanding the customer's world.
Now, it is crucial to get this. Not all needs are created equal. You have what are called implied needs. That's just a hint of a problem, right? A customer saying something vague like, "Yeah, I'm not thrilled with our current system." But then you have explicit needs, which are these clear, powerful statements of want, like, "We absolutely need a new system with 99.9% uptime." Now, in a small sale, an implied need might be enough to get by, but in a major sale, it's the explicit need that gets the deal signed.
So your entire job in a complex sale is to be a kind of guide. You don't just find problems. You help the customer develop their vague dissatisfactions, their implied needs, and you build them up into a concrete, urgent desire for a solution, an explicit need.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? How do you develop a need? Well, this is where this simple, elegant, and incredibly powerful spin framework comes into play. It's a four-step questioning strategy that guides the conversation perfectly.
The model flows in a really clear sequence. You see, SPIN is an acronym for the 4 types of questions you need to ask, and you ask them in order: situation, problem, implication, and finally need-payoff. Each one just builds right on top of the last.
All right, first up are situation questions. These are the basics. You're just gathering data, facts, and a little background about what the customer's world looks like right now.
Their whole purpose is just to understand the landscape. But, and this is a huge but, you have to use them sparingly. Ask too many situation questions, and you're just going to bore a senior-level buyer. Do your homework before the call so you can ask smart, focused questions.
Okay, let's move on to the P for problem questions. And this is where things really start to get interesting. These questions are designed to move past the simple facts and start uncovering those implied needs we talked about, the customer's difficulties, their frustrations, their problems.
The research is crystal clear on this. More experienced, successful sellers ask way more problem questions. They are digging for pain. A question like, "So what are the downsides to the way you're doing this now?" is a perfect example of how you start to unearth those initial implied needs.
And now for the I implication questions. And I gotta tell you, this is probably the most powerful and, frankly, the most difficult part of the whole spin model. This is where you take the problem the customer just told you about and you start to explore its consequences.
Implication questions are what transform a small, nagging problem into a big, urgent business issue. You're basically connecting the dots for the customer. You ask things like, "So, what effect is that problem having on your output? How is that impacting your costs or your team's morale?" This is what builds the business case for change. This is what creates real urgency. And this is where the top sellers really shine.
And finally, once that pain is clear and significant, we move to the N, Need-Payoff Questions.
And these flip the conversation from the problem to the solution, but they do it with this brilliant little twist.
See, instead of you telling the customer all the benefits, you ask questions that get them to tell you. How would it help you if you could solve this problem? When the buyer starts talking about the value themselves, they are literally selling themselves on your solution. It builds their confidence and gets them ready to go champion your idea inside their own company. It's genius.
Now, one of the most incredible side effects of using the spin model correctly is how it deals with a salesperson's greatest fear: objections. It doesn't teach you how to handle them. It helps you prevent them from ever even coming up in the first place. Think about the traditional way of selling. It's just a recipe for disaster, right? You lead with all your product's features, which almost guarantees the customer is going to come back with objections about price or relevance because you haven't built any value yet.
The key is really understanding the difference between features, advantages, and true benefits. As you can see here, a feature is just a fact about your product. An advantage shows how that feature can be used. But a true benefit, what the research calls a type B benefit, that's when you show how your solution meets an explicit need that the customer has already told you about. And because you used spin to build that need up, the benefit lands with incredible power, and it just melts objections away. Ultimately, spin selling isn't just a set of tactics or a new script. It's a fundamental shift in your mindset. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who sells a product, and you start seeing yourself as a consultant who solves problems. This quote just captures the new philosophy perfectly. In major sales, you're not going for a quick win. You are building a long-term, consultative partnership, and the sale, that's really just the beginning of the relationship. So, I'll leave you with this final thought to reflect on. The next time you're in front of a client, ask yourself, what is my true intent here? Am I just trying to sell my product, or am I genuinely trying to understand and solve their problems? Because the answer to that question, well, it could change everything.